health-related information on the following show provides general information only. Content presented on any show by any host or guest should not be substituted for a doctor's advice. Always consult your physician before beginning any new diet, exercise, or treatment program.
Welcome to the Accelerated Health TV and radio show. I'm your host, Sara Banta. I'm a wife, a busy mom of 3, and the founder of the cutting edge and award-winning supplement brand Accelerated Health Products. This podcast is more than just a source of information. It's a community for you and for those looking to optimize their health. I release new episodes live every Monday and Tuesday and a bonus one on Thursday. So remember to subscribe and add to your playlist so you never miss a show, and join my free health group coaching on Telegram. There is no downside. I answer your questions. I give you tips and tools every day. And yes, 7 days a week. The details can be found on my website, sarabanthealth.com. We are talking about one of my favorite topics, and we've got a return guest who is so knowledgeable and so well known, Dr. Brownstein. He's the author of 15 best-selling books, including The Miracle of Natural Hormones, Overcoming Arthritis, Overcoming Thyroid Disorders, and Iodine, Why You Need It and Why You Can't Live Without It. If you missed our episode on iodine, which we'll touch on a little bit today, make sure you go back and listen. Welcome, Dr. Brownstein. How are you today?
I'm good, Sarah. Thanks for having me back.
I'm super excited, and you don't even know this, but salt has a history with me. So my son, he had leukemia at the age of 9. Naturally, we got through that. He is super healthy. He then went on to being an athlete in high school. At the age of 59, he was rowing crew 4 hours a day. And he, like me, type A personality, takes things to the nth degree. Well, we got ourselves in a position where his heart was stopping. And it literally took him to pound on his heart to get it going again. And we were told by a practitioner to put him on a low salt diet. He had too much sodium in his blood. So when we did, what was so interesting is the sodium in his blood on his scans never came down. And why is that? Because the body's smart. If you don't give it what it needs, it's going to hold on to every little morsel, just like when you diet. It's going to hold on to every fat molecule and calorie. It's going to keep it until it trusts you again. So it's just this big example of what the body needs. So long story short, started supplementing with the right kind of salt, and his heart started working better. His sodium levels didn't change because the body started trusting him again when would let it go if it didn't need it. But he needed that salt, especially with working out so hard. And this happened in a 15-year-old. So imagine what's going on in the 65-year-old and more. And the other thing I wanted to just mention, I came across articles today that eating too much salt is the cause of over 10,000 deaths in Europe. And it's causing stomach cancer. So salt has been vilified, and we are confused. So that is why it's so important for you, Dr. Brownstein, to help spread the word and correct all of these myths that are out there.
Well, I'm happy to be here, and you're right with salt. It's there's a lot of myths about salt out there. I was taught in my training that nobody needs to add salt to any food, that we get in too much salt in our standard American diet, and all salt causes hypertension, period. So the less salt, the better. And in my beginning of my career, I bought into that, and I used to tell patients that. And then when I learned about salt, I started looking at people holistically and started really looking at chemistries, blood chemistries. I realized the vast majority of people are deficient in salt. Let me tell you how I got started with salt, because I was a conventional doctor. I told you, went through my history in the last show. I won't repeat that story for this one, but I was a conventional doctor to start, and didn't grow up in a holistic household. We didn't take vitamins. We didn't question anything. We just went to the doctor when we were sick and took whatever the doctor said. And I went to med school with the idea that medicine was fascinating, and conventional medicine had all the answers for treating any illness. And I didn't think about health because health wasn't really taught to me. And I finished my residency and went to practice regular medicine. And I used to tell people don't eat salt, and used to tell people salt caused hypertension. And my turning point came, I became a holistic doctor about 6 months into practicing regular medicine, when I realized I wasn't really helping people. I was just treating them with drugs that weren't treating the underlying cause of their illness, and more drugs to treat the problems from the first drugs. And I wasn't happy. I didn't think my patients were getting better. And I found a different way, and you can listen to our iodine talk, for the longer version of that story. But I start practicing holistic medicine, and I start testing every patient for a hormonal and nutritional imbalances. So my first patient was my dad, and that's what I found on him, and helped him get over his heart disease problems, or manage his heart disease problems, much more efficiently and much better. And so I began learning things, and I wasn't taught any of what I'm doing now, not much of what I was doing now in med school. So I had to go to conferences. I was reading books and articles, and I was flying out every other weekend. It felt like, to go to a meeting. And I started with bioidentical hormones. That was my first big thing. And looking at the thyroid and getting people's thyroids in better working order. The thyroid gland sits here, and it produces thyroid hormone, which is an essential substance for every single cell in the body. Helps your metabolism, helps your energy, helps brain fog. And I was diagnosing a lot of hypothyroidism at the beginning of my holistic career, and putting people on a lot of people on thyroid hormone, natural thyroid hormone, to feel better. And then I stumbled across iodine, and we went through this talk in more detail. But I found that the vast majority of my patients, over 97%, were deficient in iodine. And when I started using iodine, they needed less thyroid hormone and less other hormones. And, that was another improvement in my holistic career. And so during this time, when I started to really look at physiology and biochemistry, I was drawing a lot of blood work on patients. I still do. And I was looking at chemistries and how to optimize chemistries. And I started to, instead of in conventional medicine, where, you're taught to listen to your patients and you're taught to take a history, but really you're looking for how to diagnose that pathology and how to prescribe that one drug to treat that pathology. And most of the diagnosis is, with your pen. You're ordering tests or ordering scans or ordering something. And then you're using your pen to write the prescription to treat whatever that pathology you think you found. So when I started to really look at people's chemistries and, what was optimizing them, I began focusing on their electrolytes and salt. The electrolytes consist of sodium, chloride, potassium, and bicarbonate. But sodium, chloride, and potassium are the three important ones. And, there's reference ranges on these lab tests. And what I began realizing when I was doing hormonal therapy, especially thyroid, was the reference range was too big.
Mhm.
People fell anywhere from here to here. They were told, "Yeah, you're in the reference range. Everything's fine with your thyroid." Well, this person over here on the top end and this person on the bottom end are totally different people and totally different needs, and they're not fine. And what I found with most reference ranges that are wide like this, most of the optimal reference ranges fall towards the top end of it. So sodium was one of the things that I looked at, and the reference range from sodium, I should have got a lab report. Actually, I do have a lab report in front of me. The reference range for sodium runs between about 135 to 145 or so. And I'll find it on here. Well, I can't find it right now. But so if we call the lower part of the reference range 135, the upper part around 147 or 145 milliequivalents per liter, people can be anywhere in this reference range, and they're said, well, you have normal amounts of sodium. Well, sodium is needed. Salt is a second major constituent in the body next to water. So if we burn our bodies and burn a human body and make it into ash, the water goes away with that burning, but the salt will be the major constituent in the rest of what's left. And we should have over a gram of sodium and a gram of chloride at any one time in the body. And the reason we have so much salt in the body is it's required for every cell in the body. It's required for, I haven't counted them, but I'm assuming thousands of different chemical reactions in the body. You can't make ATP or energy molecules without sodium. Sodium runs all the, we learn about it in med school, sodium rushing into cells and, and moving nerve tissue and impulses down nerve cells that requires sodium and, and other electrolytes. So I started to notice that people who were on the lower part of the reference range of, I guess I should hold it like this. If they were on the lower part of the reference range, they didn't seem to do as good as people who were closer to the higher end of the reference range. Now, we'll get into it, but I'm talking about people with normal kidney function, normal heart function. They don't have heart failure. They don't have kidney failure. Those people are a little different for this whole salt discussion. We can get into that, at some point. But because salt is needed for so many reactions in the body, my experience with every essential item in the body is that we don't need minimal amounts of these essential items. We need optimal amounts of these essential items. And the optimal amounts, again, are usually closer to the higher end of the reference range. So I started to experiment with my patients and put them on salt. And I didn't know anything about salt. And I started, what is salt? Is it Morton's table salt? Is it sea salt? What is it? Well, I started to, pull the articles on salt and read the literature on salt. And, I found a huge difference between refined and unrefined salt. There's more, there's minerals in unrefined salt. There's no minerals in refined salt. There's these toxic chemicals in refined salt. There should be no toxic chemicals in unrefined salt. And it would only make sense to me that you'd want some trace minerals in your salt, since it's nature, that's how it comes. And our body uses trace minerals to run hundreds, if not thousands, of different reactions in the body. And why would you want a salt that's devoid of minerals? That's not how salt was made in nature. So I started to put people on salt who were on the lower part of the reference range or below it, and they felt better. I mean, they were fatigued. They were brain fogged. They didn't have energy. They got headaches. They got better with more salt. Yeah. So I just started using salt, and I was using unrefined salt, and I'm sure you can ask about, we'll talk about that. And what happened was I was writing my iodine book. Now, I've written 16 books. Iodine, I don't know what number it is now, but I was writing my iodine book and I was finishing it. And I practice in Michigan in the Metro Detroit area. In the Detroit Free Press, every Tuesday there was an article from a nutritionist, and she would take questions and provide an answer. So near the end of writing my iodine book, and I write my own books, I do my, I have people help me edit, but I do my own corrections and, format it and all that stuff. So I was heavy into it, and I was near the end and doing the final formatting and things like that. And she writes, the question came into her, is there any difference in unrefined salt and refined salt? No, she said, the question came in, is there any difference in sea salt and regular salt? So her answer was no, there's no difference. They both contain sodium, and they both cause hypertension, elevated blood pressures, and should be limited in the diet. It was a quick answer. So I saw the article. I was busy with my iodine book trying to get it out. So I cut it out and I taped it above my computer screen, which I'm looking at. It's over on here on the left side here. And it annoyed me. And I usually write books either because I'm passionate about something or I'm annoyed about something. And I was not planning on writing a book about salt at all. But I knew when she answered that question, that was my next book. So I taped it over the wall above my screen, and I looked at it every day for the next few weeks. So I was finishing that iodine book, got progressively annoyed with it. As soon as that iodine book went to press, I started pulling the literature on salt, and getting ready to write that book. And that book came out shortly after the iodine book. And here it is. So it's interesting. What I found with a lot of things is, you brought up the myth of salt. well, there's the myth of iodine. There's a whole bunch of myths out there in conventional medicine, and certainly during COVID, now we got lots of myths. The myth of social distancing, the myth of wearing masks to prevent viral illnesses, whatever, a bunch of those myths too. But what I've always found is when there's a myth, I'm curious, well, where'd the myth come from? So when I started to pull the literature on salt, if you go on PubMed and you do literature searches, you'll get recent things in PubMed and literature searches. And I pull these articles, and I'm pretty good at it. I know what I'm looking for, and I know how to navigate medical research. I know how to read these articles. I know how to navigate them and know how to get them. And I start pulling these articles, and when I find a really interesting article, I look at the references, and I look at what the author is referencing when they make an important statement, and I pull their reference, and I go pull that article, and I start going backwards in time. So all through these salt articles, that salt equals hypertension, because in my experience, when I started to put my patients on salt as part of sort of a daily regimen, and I was having them measure it out and use an X amount of salt, and I didn't see the blood pressure go up. Now, once in a very blue moon, salt will raise blood pressure in somebody. And they're salt sensitive people. They are not common. And there are patients out there, they are truly not common. And again, it's a little different with congestive heart failure and kidney failure. So I see a salt sensitive patient, maybe, I would say less than one time a year. Way less than one time a year. Every couple of years, something like that will happen. So I wasn't seeing blood pressure go up. So I started to assume another myth in medicine. I was already practicing holistic medicine for a few years, and people were feeling better with it. It certainly wasn't harming anybody. And the salt levels were improving on their blood work. And, I was sure I was doing a good thing for my patients. So I started pulling these articles, and I started going back in time. There's all these references to salt and hypertension. So you go back, you find this article, you find this article, you find this article. Well, in the 1970s, I finally go back and they start all referencing this InterSalt study that says the use of salt is associated with high blood pressure. So I pulled the InterSalt study. It was somewhere in the early 1970s. It was a U.S. government-funded study, and they used, I believe, 8 or so medical centers across the world, 8 or so centers across the world. It was more than that. I think it was double-digit centers across the world where they looked at sodium intake and blood pressure in different populations. And then they put the data together, and they concluded that elevated salt in the diet is directly associated with hypertension. And, that was the conclusion of the article. And then conventional medicine ran with it and said, we all need to lower our salt. The United States gets too much salt. The average salt ingestion in the United States is too high. That's what's driving our hypertension epidemic. And we need to lower salt intake. The Surgeon General went on radio shows and TV shows, and he was in all the literature. And that was his cause célèbre at the time, to get the U.S. to lower salt intake. And so I pulled a study, and it literally, I don't know, took me 20 minutes or so to see that it's like the Wizard of Oz. You pull when Toto pulls the curtain aside, and you hear the fire and the wizard saying, who, don't talk back to me, or whatever he said to him. And then they realize it's just a guy back there, with the levers, and he tells them to ignore that man behind the curtain. Well, that's what I feel like I'm doing every day, is pulling the curtain aside. So I read that InterSalt article, and most Western centers where they studied sodium intake, and they studied sodium intake by measuring urinary sodium output, which gives you an idea how much sodium comes in. And then they did blood pressures. And in a bunch of different centers, there's no correlation. Some had high salt intake, some had low intake, and the blood pressure, there was no correlation. In 2 of the centers, there was a correlation with low salt intake and low blood pressure. And that's where the conclusion of the article came in, that high salt causes hypertension and low salt's better, and we need to lower our diet. Well, the 2 centers were non-acculturated populations. They were tribes. One was in Brazil, and the other was I studied them in college at the University of Michigan, the national champions in football. And it was what was the name of that group? The Yanomamo Indians. My professor at the University of Michigan did his PhD thesis on the Yanomamo Indians. So guess what we learned a lot in cultural anthropology? I knew the Yanomamo Indians backwards and forwards after that semester. So the Yanomamo Indians didn't get a lot of salt in their diet, and they had very low blood pressure. And so because of that, we were told to lower our sodium intake, our salt intake. Well, the Yanomamo Indians, and I remember this from my class, the Yanomamo Indians died around age 50. They didn't live to old age. So we know blood pressure goes up as people get older. And maybe their blood pressure didn't go up because they didn't age and they died at a young age. The Yanomamo Indians hunted for their food. They didn't go to the grocery store. They didn't eat refined foods. They ate whatever they could gather, whatever they could kill. And so they were all thin. They didn't smoke cigarettes. At least I didn't remember learning about that. And, I don't think the two non-acculturated populations were really something that we should base national policy on for the next, now we're into 50 years or so from that study came out. And, that was where it really took off, that we need to lower our salt intake. And then, there's a couple of other studies where they give rats just enormous amounts of salt that we would never eat. We couldn't eat in a day. We just couldn't do it. And it screwed up a bunch of functions in their body, but their blood pressure went up in the poor rats. But I can tell you with a lot of experience in treating thousands of patients with salt and unrefined salt that their blood pressure doesn't go up in the vast majority of patients, and they feel better.
It's almost like people talking about estrogen being bad. Well, there's good estrogen, there's bad estrogen. It actually should have a different name. Refined salt and unrefined salt are two very different things. And when these studies come out pointing to salt as the bad guy causing stomach cancer or heart disease, they're not looking at the full diet. They're not looking at the fact that 70% of the American diet today is processed food with stripped down sodium, with none of the trace minerals, full of microplastics. Then you add in the glyphosate and the GMOs and the gluten and the toxins that are in that food that's driving up insulin resistance and blood sugar, high fructose corn syrup, all of these other things. But what you have to do, and you kind of touched on this, is who's benefiting from a low salt diet? Like, let's follow the money. And be careful with how I say this. You are getting an increase in statin drugs and diabetic drugs when the government started pushing low salt diets.
So that's, you know what, that's a really good lead in. I'm looking at my chapters in my book. A low salt diet, it's chapter 4 and 5. I talk about this. I was trained that any amount of salt causes high blood pressure. Therefore, the lowest amount of salt is the best. And period. There was really no discussion on it. But what I've learned is a low salt diet promotes hypertension. So if you put someone on a low salt diet, salt is such an important substance for the body that, the reference range in our lab tests looks like this, but really our body really wants to be in a reference range of about like this, a normal range of like this. And it doesn't like to be up here and it doesn't like to be down here. So when you drop your sodium levels down, which you can do on a really low salt diet, I mean, you can do that, especially if you're elderly, you can do that really fast. But if a bunch of triggering mechanisms come into the adrenal glands and the kidneys to help the body resorb sodium and not pee it out. And that includes hormones like renin and aldosterone. And these things, renin and aldosterone, raise blood pressure. So a bunch of antihypertensive drugs have anti-renin effects and anti-aldosterone effects. That's how they work. So it's interesting that we're told, well, low salt will lower your blood pressure, but no, low salt causes hypertension. Then you're going to need medication to treat the elevated hormones that are trying to restore you to homeostasis and raise your salt levels. And if you feel like I'm talking like I'm in Alice in Wonderland, where down is up and up is down, that's exactly where I'm at. And
I
unfortunately,
love
that's the
that
world
you're
we live in
saying
today.
And I love that you're talking about the stress hormones, because will you dive a little deeper into the fact that when you are working your adrenals, when you're really stressed out, you actually need more salt. Your body uses that salt when you're doing something very mentally tasking, like studying for finals or getting ready for a big project, or you have got family stress. Your body needs more salt to help support those adrenals.
I got this picture in the book that shows the relationship. It's in a chapter on salt and the adrenal glands, and I go through the literature showing that we got enough hypertensive meds to lower renin and lower aldosterone levels, and triggers a whole cascade of effects to constrict the blood vessels and to try and get the body to resorb sodium, when really the treatment for it is more salt. I've gotten so many hypertensive patients off their hypertensive drugs by putting them on salt and monitoring their levels, and then getting them off these anti-renin, anti-aldosterone anti-aldosterone drugs that are out there.
Yeah. So we're in this toxic world. And last time when we were talking about iodine, we talked about one of the functions is that it helps detox the cells. But salt is part of that equation. If you don't have enough sodium or potassium for that sodium-potassium pump to get the nutrients in the cell and the toxins out, what are you going to do, right? So can you dive a little deeper into salt as a balance to the iodine with detoxification?
So in our last talk, I think I went through, the human body, we were designed by our maker to have certain receptors that are looking for their mineral or their nutrient or their vitamin, whatever they're there for. And such as we have receptors for iodine, in our thyroid and the breasts and the ovaries and the pancreas and, all the glandular tissue. So we should take in enough iodine to saturate those receptors with iodine. So in the thyroid, you can make thyroid hormone. In the adrenal glands, you can make adrenal hormones. In the breast, you can maintain normal architecture, not get lumps and bumps and growths, abnormal growth of tissue. Unfortunately, in our modern world, as you mentioned, with the devitalized food that's out there, we're not getting in enough essential nutrients, and we're getting in too many toxins. So we have been designed, pretty well, and it's a pretty perfect design that we can live in a low. Let's take iodine, for example. We can live in a low iodine environment for a while, and we have mechanisms to move iodine from a low concentration, such as in the bloodstream, when there's low iodine in the environment, or people aren't taking iodine, and move iodine into let's say the thyroid gland or the breast. And it's the mechanism to move that iodine is called the sodium iodine symporter. And it's so important that we've been designed to use 2 sodium atoms to move 1 iodine atom into the thyroid gland and use up an ATP, a precious ATP molecule to do that. It's so important that we do it. We're willing to sacrifice an ATP molecule to do it. Well, you need 2 atoms of sodium to accomplish that. If you don't have enough salts, which is sodium and chloride, you're going to have trouble doing that. And it makes like the thyroid worse. It makes the adrenals worse. It makes the hormone system worse when people are low in salt. And, the common complaints I'm hearing from my patients low in salt is they're fatigued, they're brain fog, they're achy. They get leg cramps and foot cramps. And these can all be like same symptoms as hypothyroidism. So the treatment in this situation may be just put them on more salt first, and perhaps, salt and iodine. Perhaps the thyroid gland can get iodinated again. They can make thyroid hormone, and you're going to need salt to do that. So one of the points I made in our last talk was that I never prescribe iodine without salt.
Yeah.
Remember, congestive heart failure, kidney failure. We got to talk about that at the end of this, but those are the people you got to be careful with salt. But salt is helpful for getting iodine into the cells. Salt's helpful for getting toxins out of the body. In the old days, when bromide which is a toxic halide that can compete with iodine, when bromide was used in a lot of medicine products and it was, I'm old enough to remember the ads for Bromoseltzer. Now you get Alka-Seltzer. And Bromoseltzer was a bromine molecule, and you put it in water like the Alka-Seltzer, and you drink it when you have heartburn. And heartburn 30 years ago when I started medicine was just like it is today, man. A lot of people get it, and they're looking for relief. So they would get toxic on these drugs that have bromine in it, like Bromoseltzer. And toxicity from bromine can result in fatigue and confusion and mental decline. And the treatment for bromine toxicity was to salt the bromine out. The sodium would bind with bromide, make a salt of it so you could get it out of the body. And the chloride could in a salt IV, a normal saline IV, would help to push bromide out of the body, and the sodium would help usher it out safely. So one of the things with salt is, you can help toxins like bromide come out of the body, like fluoride. But salt also is, I find, very helpful for the heavy metals: mercury, lead, cadmium, arsenic, nickel. So I think salt has a lot of really wonderful effects and we have so much salt in our body. There's a reason for it. It's not just there to be there. We were not designed ridiculously. We were designed for a purpose. We were designed to have over a gram of sodium and a gram of chloride for a reason, because it's used all over the place. And keep in mind, we have no stores of salt. We don't sit here with a hump on our backs of salt ready to draw on it when the environment's not giving us enough salt, like camels draw on water when they live in the desert. And we don't have that. So we got to get it in on a daily basis, or we're deficient.
I love that you mentioned that you never prescribe iodine without salt, because I recommend people taking their Accelerdyne iodine, and then after 12 minutes, put a little of the accelerated ancient salt, which is a full complete salt with 62 minerals in it, on their tongue or in their water 12 minutes after. And, a couple months ago, I was in need of a liver flush. I was really nauseous on a daily basis, and I'd put salt on my tongue, and that was the only thing that would actually help the nausea go away, because it also plumps up the blood to push out the salt and the detoxing that the iodine's doing, or if you're doing another detox protocol. But there's a lot of times when people get on my cleanses, they go from the standard American diet to a more high wild animal protein focused whole food diet that tends to be lower carb, and they feel great day 1 and 2. Day 3, they go, Sarah, I'm out of energy. Well, because you just let go of a whole bunch of sodium and potassium in your urine, and you need to hydrate with salt. And you get that salt gives you energy. They say that by supplementing with salt before a workout, that you have energy for an additional 21 minutes. And it's giving that body the physical and mental energy. We talked a little bit, or touched a little bit, on the fact that low salt diets can exacerbate diabetes or heart disease. And there's that insulin resistance. Insulin resistance at the liver is diabetes. Insulin resistance at the heart is heart disease. Why
the brain is Alzheimer's?
Yes, exactly. And at the ovaries is PCOS. So insulin resistance is pretty much causing most metabolic diseases. So I have said that salt, when you're low salt, your body will increase sugar cravings, confusing the signals. But also, what would make salt actually help insulin resistance?
Through a variety of mechanisms. And number one, it turns off all these stress hormones from the adrenal glands. When we touched on it earlier, when you're low in salt, the adrenals go into action to try and release hormones to cause you to not pee out sodium from the diet. So salt's such an important item. People get incredibly sick when their sodium levels fall just below the reference range. I mean, during COVID, that was a disaster. People had low sodium. I mean, in our office, we do so many saline IVs. I can't even tell you, it's just, and people love them. And POTS people, they have trouble maintaining their salt levels. They need, a lot of times IVs of salt, and particularly when the weather's hot, these people have a lot of trouble, and, they can lower their blood pressure so much. So the adrenal glands respond. The adrenal glands sense the stress of the body when sodium levels are low. It releases the hormones to try and reabsorb sodium. Also releases these stress hormones like epinephrine, cortisol, and it turns into a mess in the body. And cortisol can cause elevated blood sugar, and block insulin, and people can't sleep, and then they get anxious, and they get more depressed, and it just goes on and on and on. It's like chasing your tail. And sometimes the fulcrum of that treatment, the main thing, is salt, and just getting their salt levels up, and trying to get them off the drugs that they're on. That's trying to block these hormones that are being, the drugs aren't treating the underlying cause of the problem. The underlying cause of the problem is lack of sodium in the diet.
So how much salt should we have a day? And we're talking about a complete salt. We're not talking about refined salt.
So look, I guess we should take a step back, and when we're all talking about salt, we shouldn't mention sea salt. Sea salt's an erroneous name. All salt came from the ocean. All salt from the earth came from the ocean at some point in its life. So refined salt, like Morton salt, that has no minerals in it, it's got sodium and chloride. 99% of it is sodium and chloride. And then the small percentage of it is ferrocyanide and some other toxic chemicals like aluminum silicate. But that came from the ocean at some point in its life, just like Selena's Celtic brand salt, or the salt that you held up, or Redmond's, or any of those unrefined salts. That came from the ocean too. So my preference when we all talk to each other about salt is refined or unrefined, not sea salt. So with I'm in the weeds right now. What did you ask me?
How much should we have a day?
How much should we have? Everyone's a unique biochemical individual, and it's best to work with a salt literate practitioner who understands, what salt is used for and the importance of salt. But just as a general rule, without heart failure, without kidney failure, most people, I'm just averaging here, a teaspoon of unrefined salt a day beyond what's in food and what they're cooking with. And in addition to that, and how they get it in is their business. I tell them you can put it in water bottles. I am drinking from a water bottle here. I probably have you should see what I put in my water bottles. It's like drinking the ocean. I mean, my wife can't drink my water. And I put a big heaping teaspoon in, this is probably a little bit under a liter, but I don't even taste it anymore. And one of the ways I think people can measure how much salt they need, number one, they should have their levels checked periodically. But clinically, if you're getting leg cramps or foot cramps, you are lacking salt, period, exclamation point, end of story. We don't have to talk more about it. I know magnesium and potassium can help too, foot cramps and leg cramps, but it's lack of salt. So I tell my patients, if you get a leg cramp or a foot cramp in the middle of the night, a little ding should go off in your head. I'm lacking salt. And just go get up, it's nighttime. You don't want to take a teaspoon of salt at night. You'll be up peeing all night. But, maybe a big pinch of salt, when that happens, and a little bit of water, it should take the cramp right away. And if you get cramps after that, you're not getting enough salt. So take more. How much salt till your cramps go away? That's generally what I tell people. Now, having said that, I have some patients on tablespoons of salt. Now, that's unusual. There are a few of them. One lady comes to mind. She's just had this chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia picture for years and years and years. And she requires 6 to 8 teaspoons of salt. That's over 2 tablespoons. When she drops below the 2 tablespoons, she doesn't feel good. And we've not been able to get her down, but she lives a normal life on that amount of salt. Mm-hmm. She's not thrilled with it, but she just puts it in water bottles, and her, like me, are used to it now. And most people know a teaspoon, maybe 2 teaspoons. More if you're an athlete, more if you're sweating all the time,
Right.
and more if you're getting leg cramps and foot cramps.
Or if you're in the hot weather. But and another sign is a headache. Most headaches can be alleviated with salt and water.
Yes.
And it goes back to the trio of water, salt, and iodine. I mean, I love supplements. I sell a lot of supplements, but those are the 3 basic foundations of life. And without those, nothing
I
else.
agree with you, sister. You're right on the money.
So we've got just 4 more minutes to touch on this. And you wanted to talk about kidney failure and congenital heart failure. But before you get into why those people need to be careful of salt, let's take a step back. And how did they get to this this place in the first place? It's not the salt, it's the processed foods and the high fructose corn syrup and the toxins and not moving and not exercising and all the stress and lifestyle issues and eating a ton of refined sodium, not the unrefined salt. So with that, what do you have to say about those groups?
Quickly, be careful with kidney failure and heart failure. A lot of them cannot take salt, and they'll notice they get swollen ankles or puffiness of their tissues. If that happens, you got to lower the salt intake. And really, because we only have a few minutes, I want to mention to you that one of the things I saw during COVID and I see during flu season is people who start off in the lower part of the reference range for salt. When these people get sick with a flu or a cold or a virus or something, if you support the body up, it should be able to get over these things. But the people that run into trouble are the ones on the lower part of this reference range or below the reference range. And those are people that they're, things go down very quickly. So when I see people with sodium of 130 or less, I tell them dangerously low sodium levels. If they drop much further than that, they can get seizures. They can die from that. And I do see people with that, and a lot of older people. So salt is really critical, and it should be checked. I say you should have your salt levels checked in your blood every 6 months. And don't put up with keeping yourself in the lower part of the reference range. It's not a good place to be because you got no cushion when you get sick. You could drop here, and then you're ending up in the ER for an illness that you shouldn't have to get emergent care from. So during COVID, I found that we gave a lot of hydration IVs during COVID that had salt in it for this purpose. And what salt would do was get rid of their headaches, get rid of their bad headaches, get rid of their migraine, clear their head, and allow them to breathe better. I mean, their lungs went to, I don't know better, their lungs got really bad during COVID. And in those patients who were dehydrated or had low sodium levels, man, they needed salt. And we gave it to them IV, and that was really one of the better things that we did for people. So I always tell people if these low sodium levels are a lower part of the reference range, you don't want to be there for the long term. It's not a good place to be. You better start adding a teaspoon or 2 of salt in your diet to move that level up, into the mid to upper part of that reference range. Or, I write in my book that the optimal sodium level should be above 140 milliequivalents per liter, and the optimal chloride level should be above 103 milliequivalents per liter. Now, those levels in this reference range that you'll go to your lab, 141 or higher is right about here. Chloride, the same thing. The reference range is here. 103 or higher is sort of up here. If you have normal kidney function, you can ingest a huge amount of salt, and you should have counter-regulatory mechanisms from your kidney, get rid of what the body doesn't need and retain what it needs. Yeah. And just salt's a fascinating subject that, when I give my lecture on salt to either lay people or to doctors, I always start off with that slide of that article cut out, and her picture's on that article and her name's on the article. And I always give her credit. And I always thank her for writing that article, because that's how that salt book came out. And it was interesting when I wrote the salt book, there was really nothing written for people on salt. I mean, you had to go into the literature and look at it. And if you didn't find that InterSalt study, man, the literature was so skewed to salt causes hypertension that's all you take out of that stuff. And, once I got to the InterSalt study, which they were all sort of referencing, I knew it was another myth in medicine that, I needed to write about.
And you know what? I have a friend, a quick story to end, who was in the hospital for 3 weeks. She was extremely dehydrated, lots of diarrhea, couldn't hold anything down. They were, of course, giving her saline drip, but the mom said to the nurse, well, what do you have for electrolytes? The nurse said, electrolytes? Well, we've got Diet Coke. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this is our medical system. This is what we are trusting. And so people, do your research. Do your research. Read Dr. Brownstein's many books, iodine and salt specifically, of course. But it is really scary out there, and you got to follow the money. And we, of course, have to be careful with how we speak about this. But it is really important. I've seen it in my own household. My son is now 21 years old, no cancer, works out about 4 times a day because he's that type of person. And he's supplementing with salt and real whole food. He's not eating processed foods. That is a big part of the equation. It is what are you putting in your mouth with the hidden ingredients that you don't even know it's there. So before we go, Dr. Brownstein, where can people find your amazing books and everything about you?
So now I'm going to have to look up Diet Coke and see if there's actually electrolytes in there, because I don't know the answer to that one. That one I haven't studied, but that one I'll be looking that one up. So they can go to my website, www.drbrownstein.com. And, I've got all the books there and information. And, I would just leave your viewers with, if you're not feeling good, don't settle for subpar answers. Don't settle for doctors who won't go on a limb with you and work with you and try and search for the underlying cause of your problem. There are doctors out there who do that and still do that. There's not as many, but we're out there. And, it's, holistic medicine is the way to go. And, information like you're providing to patients, I'm providing to patients, gets to the underlying cause of problems and can just propel you to good health, for the rest of your life. And, Sara's an example of it. I'm an example of it. I walk the walk just like she does. And there's no way with my health history that I could be doing what I'm doing right now. And the level and the rigor of what I'm doing right now without eating a healthy diet and, correcting nutrient deficiencies, balancing the hormones and walking the walk. I am certain of that.
Well, thank you. And me as well. I mean, the reason I'm into this business is because I had hit a rock bottom with my own health, and my son was struggling with leukemia. I have a daughter that had anemia, allergies, and asthma. I had another daughter with learning issues and a husband on a risk of having a heart attack. So I had to selfishly take care of my family, and that is what has brought forth my passion for all of this. So thank you, Dr. Brownstein. Loved having you on. And everyone else, thanks for tuning in today. If you need my help with your health issues, you don't know where to start, just feel free to reach out to me at sarabantahealth.com. Happy to put together a protocol for you. When we're talking about salts, I got the number one salt that tastes amazing for all of you who don't care about your health, the accelerated ancient salt. It's not only full of 62 minerals from the Andes, from Himalayas, and from Utah. It's raw, it's pure, it's unbleached, no explosives. Did you know a lot of Himalayan salts aren't even really Himalayan salt, and they're full of explosives? But it is precisely handpicked and not with explosives, and we enhance it with scalar frequencies unlike any other salt out there. What does that mean? It helps enhance the detoxification and the hydration, the intracellular hydration that's inside your cells, not the extracellular hydration, which is that inflammation and all the puffiness that you want to get away from. So the accelerated ancient salt, and for those family members of yours that don't care about their health, they will love the taste. I have those nieces and nephews that will not go without my salt. So anyways, you can find that on sarabantahealth.com and join my free group coaching on Telegram. There is no downside. I share daily tips and tools to improve your health, and I answer your questions, and you are surrounded by an amazing community of people who are on a similar path. There's more information on my website, sarabantahealth.com. And don't forget to follow me on social media at Accelerated Health Products. You can catch this podcast and all my podcasts on over 100 platforms, including Spotify, iTunes, and iHeartRadio. Just search Accelerated Health TV and Radio Show. And I'm on a mission. I need your help to share my healing message with everyone who's ready to listen. You can help me by sharing this podcast with friends who might need my help. I'm live every Monday and Tuesday. I also post a third one on Thursday, so make sure you subscribe and use coupon WELCOME10 to get 10% off your first order, including that accelerated ancient salt and Acceleradine iodine. Thanks again for joining us here, and have a great week.